Okay, I think we'll get ready to get started. So a big welcome to everyone that's joining us here in the gallery today and to everyone online. This is our fourth and final talk of our Photobook Fair this year. So this is our 7th annual Photobook Fair. This is a fantastic event for us, bringing people together. And since we've gone digital, we're able to bring people together all over the world as well. So I'm really pleased to introduce we've got Alexa Becker here from Kehrer Verlag in Germany, and she's going to be talking to Ara Oshagan who's joining us from the USA. So just to give a little bit of context and background, if this is the first event that you're attending as part of the book fair today, all the events and talks that were programmed are designed to be in keeping and to complement the exhibition that we're showing here in the gallery. So at the moment, we're exhibiting In Which Language Do We Dream, which is a collaboration between socially engaged photographer Rich Wiles and the Al-Hindawi family, who are a family of Syrian refugees who were displaced due to the Syrian Civil War from their home in 2012 and relocated to the UK in 2017. So the exhibition that's surrounding me here in the gallery, that you can also view on our website as a virtual exhibition, is very much a co-produced body of work with the family members, especially Ruba, the mother of the family, making work around these ideas of displacement, resettlement. It's about kind of finding home, finding belonging, and finding relationships and friendships in an unfamiliar world. So I think that the talk that I'm going to present now fits really well with those themes. So Ara Oshagan is a photographer who has exhibited his work all over the world. He's also spoken very widely in New York at TED events, and yeah, it's just got a fantastic resume if you check his website. The book that Alexa and Ara are going to talk about today is Displaced, which is the third book in a trilogy of work about identity, homeland, and diaspora. And I'm sure you'll do this better than me, but just to give a bit of context, then Ara's background is he's of Armenian heritage, born in Lebanon, and then was displaced due to the Lebanese Civil War and now resides in the US. Alexa, who's joining us from Germany. So Alexa is a commissioning editor at German publishing house Kehrer Verlag. And Alexa is an expert in selecting timely and relevant photographic projects to publish and produce. She's experienced in offering guidance and mentoring to photographers for their professional development and to get their work seen. And she works also as a freelance consultant and attends international portfolio reviews. So I'm going to hand over now. Alexa and Ara are going to talk for about 30 minutes. We'll open everything up to questions after that. So if you're joining us online, then please do just add your questions in the Q&A box as we go along. And Alexa will pick those up at the end of the talk. We'll also open it up to questions from our live audience here at the gallery. So if anyone here has questions, please do save them and we'll get onto that right at the end. So I'm going to hand over now.
Thank you so much, Angela. Thanks for having us. I'm excited to talk about your book, Ara.
Yes, me too, Alexa. Thank you so much. The Impressions Gallery for making this possible, as well as Kehrer Verlag.
Yes, thank you. First of all, I would like you to say something about the necessity of making this book and what, why you thought, okay, I have to put this part of my personal history into book form. Just let us share a little bit about, its contents and the background. That would be wonderful.
Yeah, I'd be very happy to. As it was just mentioned, I'm of Armenian heritage, and I was born in Beirut, and I was displaced from Beirut by this Lebanese Civil War. And in fact, it goes back further because this displacement that is the core theme in all of my, not only my work, but sort of my whole life, has been this kind of constant displacement. And my parents were displaced. My grandparents' generation were displaced by the Armenian Genocide. And in fact, that's why there was a big Armenian community in Beirut, which has got its own history. And so as an artist, my impetus was to look at my own history, try to find some kind of an articulation of what it means to be in this kind of multi-generational kind of displacement and with legacies of violence, not only because of the genocide that's passed on to me through the generations, but also what's happened in Beirut and my displacement from Beirut.
And
so
you
this
came
book,
back, and the thing is, you came back to Beirut like 40 years after your parents left, or yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So there is also a return in this whole work, and this is it's a third book in a trilogy that I've tried to kind of articulate what it means, what does it look like to become diasporic, and to try to develop and articulate a diasporic identity. The first part being in Los Angeles, where I essentially photograph my own backyard, my own community, myself, my family, everything that I'm connected to here. Second part is in Armenia, which maybe people will think it's not so diasporic because it's kind of Armenia, it's the homeland. But really, for me, it is, because as a diasporan, the idea that somehow there is a return to something that it used to be a homeland, a motherland that you belong to, you connect to in a really deep and a significant way, a history, is always sort of on the edges of your consciousness.
Right.
And it's always there. And so that had to become part of this trilogy for me, one being LA, where I live, Armenia, which is kind of the edges of this kind of dream of what it might be. And then Beirut being where I was born, my first diaspora, in a sense.
Yeah, is it like, I mean, it's a stupid question, but I always felt like displacement happened mostly in the times where you don't know where you can settle again. But even if you've settled in a place and lived there for a longer time, like you in LA, you still feel like a displaced person in some ways, or you think it's still on the fringes of your, personal history.
Yeah.
How would you see that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, displacement, diaspora is what I would say is structural. That is, once that break happens, it's always with you. You are always, once diasporic, you are always diasporic. You have nowhere really that you really belong to, that you really connect to. You have no land under your feet, in a sense. You have this constant space, constant unmoored. You're unmoored in a very significant way in the world. And you have no clear connection to a history. And we can talk about, we'll talk about the author later, that I think it's very important to talk about his work, but
I wanted to know, let's save this for a second, because I wanted to ask you about that too, because it's really interesting how, you treat text and together with your images. But while we're at it and look at the book cover, I wanted to ask you about the title. I mean, displacement, everybody knows now what that means, but I wondered, I've seen several stages of this cover, and first, the dis was like in capital letters, displaced, and I wondered if there was a word play intended. And now you said also there's a newer version than the one we're looking at, where dis is also in italics. However, you emphasize this first part of the word. So why is that?
Yeah, so this the exact idea that diaspora and the whole concept of this book is structural. I wanted to convey that in as many ways as possible in the production of the book itself. And so the title itself has got that kind of, itself is displaced. And at first it started with the slash, this slash placed. And then I thought that was a little bit too maybe graphic-y and a little bit, it wasn't sitting well with me. So the final version of the title has got this as italic and placed as regular. And so it speaks to this state of belonging and not belonging, and being in a place, but also not being in a place. So that this is clearly this kind of the anti-place or the reversal of belonging, but also it is belonging because you are finally, I've lived in one place for 40 years. And so this really speaks to this ambiguity, which, as I said, it's really, I feel it's structural. It never leaves you. Yeah, even people, you may go back and live to places where your heritage, your history is from. You still are not going to be completely connected to that place.
And is that also the reason why you chose this this image where it's like an open street corner? It's not a home. It's kind of a place where people pass by, or is that the thought behind it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you remember, the first cover was this boy with a gun, right?
Yeah.
So that was a very direct and clear kind of image, and it really relates something very definite. But this image, as you say, it's and I picked this because it's got this kind of ambiguity in it. Here's this man, he's in the foreground, he's out of focus. Here's something happening. You don't know exactly what's happening. The street, you don't know what street it is. You have French, you have Latin letters, you have Arabic. And so this kind of, it reflects much more kind of the idea of what it means to be diasporic, what it means to be unmoored in the world in that sense. And that's why we finally settled on this cover.
Well, thanks for explaining that, because it's really important to know the reasons for an artist, what cover to choose. And I know sometimes it's a real debate, because of course the image with the little boy and the gun, we're going to see it in a minute, is much more, it's catchier,
Right. Exactly.
So from a marketing point of view, probably, the publisher would have said, oh, take this, because people it will stop people in their tracks. But no, you chose this one. But I think it's very important that you stay true to your artistic vision, right?
Yeah, that's what I thought. I mean, I had that cover on the wall for a while, and I was just living with it. And it's like, it's not really, the cover has to kind of reflect the whole project, the whole book, your whole approach, I believe, right? And so it wasn't doing that. It was really a boy with a gun takes you in a completely different place rather than this kind of idea of ambiguity and diasporic. And I mean, actually, it'd be interesting what you think about that, Alexa, because you're always in that middle of that space where you want to have the book be seen and sort of audience connect to it, but also you want to have the artistic vision become part of that.
Right.
Cover,
I mean,
right?
that's actually as I tried to indicate, it's many times it's a kind of a conflict between the artist and not so much actually the publishing house, but the sales representatives of the publishing house, the marketing team of the publishing house, to say, we have to stand out from the crowd. There's a ton of books there. You have to kind of, catch people's attention.
Right.
And, the publishing house is usually on the artist's side. And so there's basically every freedom, but professionally, it would have been, maybe sometimes wiser to pick another image or a bigger font or, a brighter color or whatever.
Color, right,
but
right,
I mean,
exactly.
That's why we're also in the realm of fine art and fine art photography, because it's not only about, being loud and aggressive in your marketing and stuff. So we have to rely on other ways to communicate that this is of importance, right? But there's it's a discussion. It's worth a discussion every time, definitely, yes. Yeah.
Right.
So let's dive into those beautiful black and white images. Is there a reason you chose black and white? Is that also true for your former books, because it's a trilogy, or?
Yeah. So the other two, the first of the trilogy is not actually a book. It's just a project, and one day that'll become a book also. But my second book, Fatherland, which is about Armenia and being diasporic in Armenia, that's all black and white photography like this, and it has to do with sight in terms of going into a space where you are in some way deeply connected and responding to that space and to the landscape and the people, and bringing a certain history with you that's related to that space and that people and that landscape. And so the photography kind of becomes this kind of response to that space. And it takes a long time for me actually to return to a place many times before the project kind of finds shape and finds a kind of articulation that I'm looking for.
Right. Yes.
Yeah, and so the Beirut work that you're looking at here and displaced is mostly is this kind of a small neighborhood. Actually, it's very intense in that way, in that it's just this 5-10 block space. Most of the work is done in that space, and that community was actually a community that was settled by Armenian Genocide survivors from 1915, 1920, and so there's 4 generations there who came from legacy of violence and dispossession and displacement, and they rebuilt their lives. But then there was more displacement because of more violence and more war, and so that this kind of layering of history, this layering of events, kind of is what I'm kind of trying to connect to.
Right, and also because it is such a many-layered, project. I think you also relied very strongly on text and on the author to kind of make it to make it more rounded experience and to give it even more depth. Will you enlighten us about it? Also, it's a very special piece of writing. Maybe you want to say something about that too.
Yeah, so the author, his name is Kehrer Verlag, is the preeminent Armenian author of the Armenian diaspora right now. He's got, I don't know, maybe 20-25 novels that he's written, and a lot of his work, he is so what's very interesting about us is that we share kind of a similar past. He's also from Beirut. He also left Beirut, but as a young man, he left Beirut, and then he returned to write all these novels about Beirut and where he had grown up. And so when I reached out to him, because he was obviously the person to connect to in a project like this, I asked him to write an introduction. I didn't want to burden him with anything. He ended up writing this very significant piece of a very significant literary piece that very much followed in the vein of the novels, many novels that he'd written that are based deeply on the research in the place, as well as the history and the language of the place, and he writes about this journey that also he walks as a youth through the exact same spaces that I photographed. But he's a youth, and it's set in the 1950s nominally, but it's really very, very contemporary, and there are all these interesting visible and invisible connections between the images and the text.
Yeah, what I love is that, and what makes it special is that it's sometimes you have a text about the historical content and value of the pictures, or the history of the country where the photographs were taken, or about the photographer's practice, but or you have a piece of fiction that came from a different book and was allowed to be reproduced there, but you rather rarely have a piece of writing, of literature that was created especially for this body of work. So this is truly remarkable.
Yes, it is truly remarkable, and that's why it became kind of a collaboration, even though I started the project by myself, and then now I really see it as a collaboration, because there are all these parallels between the way we worked and the way the works were created at the same time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
And I mentioned that this is going to be the first major work translated into English by this author. So I think that's really also, it's really important in that sense. He writes exclusively in Western Armenian. Western Armenian is my language also. It's a language of my grandfather, my grandfather, who were also writers actually, and this is the language of the area of the Armenian population of Western Armenian population in what is today Turkey, who were exiled out of Turkey because of the genocide. So this whole population, we brought the language out, and the issue is that Western Armenian language right now is an endangered language because it's not being used that much. It's not being, new generation is not using it, is not writing in it as much as they used to. So it's kind of a language on the brink of not existing anymore. And what I really, really appreciate with Kehrer Verlag is that he writes only in Western Armenian. His literature is only in Western Armenian, even though he lives in France. He knows French as well as any French person, but he only writes in that language because he's committed to that language.
Yeah, even though it limits his readership, right?
Exactly.
So that's also like he's very consequent in that regard. Like you choose the cover you think is perfect, which perfectly expresses what's inside this book, even maybe for the sake of, you know, some sales, because you could have picked a catchier cover, and he's like really consequent in just writing in Western Armenian. I think that's remarkable, and maybe that's also a quality you only find in the arts anymore. Do you think? I mean,
in terms of the quality
in terms of like sacrificing like bigger commercial success to an idea that's very important to that person, to the artist, to the author, to the photographer, you name it.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I really have tremendous amount of respect for him. He is committed to what is really critical for him and his own community and his own history. It's this language that he believes in. And he does. I mean, I think, you know, I was just reading the Tanzanian author who won the Nobel Prize, right? He writes with the exact same kind of issues, dealing with the same communities, but in Africa, obviously, Kehrer Verlag deals with it in the Middle East, in Beirut. But Kehrer Verlag could have been somebody who would contend for a prize like that if he wrote in another language. But he's committed to what's really critical for him and important for him and his community. I think that's really.
I think we could have a really interesting discussion on whether that's leading somewhere or not, you know, because, you know, on the other hand, you have to open up also and share it with more people, you know, on the other hand, you know, but that's super interesting, definitely. Yes. And I know it's so hard if, you know, if a language is not spoken outside your own home, to cultivate this and to pass it on, because it's more work, it needs discipline and so on and so forth. So yes.
Yeah, and it requires resources, it requires institutions. And when you're a diasporic community, all those things are in very short supply. Right. Institutions and that persist for many generations and have resources, that becomes very difficult. But it is also very important, Alexa, for me, the work has to come out into the world, right? I think it's very, very important to bring it out beyond the confines, because it is a universal language. Obviously, photography is a universal language, but also his writing it touches on all these universal themes that people connect to across the whole planet. And so that part of it is also really, really important.
Right. And you are not only a photographer, but also an artist working with multimedia, installation, film, and so on. Is there a specific quality in photography that you appreciate, or, you know, is this, you know, just a coincidence? Okay, now I'm photographing and doing a book, and next day I'm doing an installation, or is this the phase you're in, or how do you handle these, or do you prioritize or value one over the other?
So they're all interconnected to me, and they all kind of really start with a photograph, with the still image in many ways, right? So my work is fundamentally about the still image, because I think in the still image, the composition that I try to create, the structure that I try to connect to in the imagery is kind of where everything begins for me. And so books, obviously, but also I've done installation work based on photography, specifically still photography. And the film work that I've done is kind of like still imagery in the sense that it's very still, it's got motion, but it isn't this kind of fast-paced kind of film, but it's a lot of times it's 3-channel videos, for instance, that I make. And there's a structural kind of relationship between the 3 different channels that make you, like in my still images where I like to have people have their eyes wander into different places. So you're always looking at multiple things happening, sort of a layering, sort of an ambiguity in the work itself, blurred things and foreground, background, things like that. That also translates into how I make the film, my films, and as well as the work that I do, installation art. So they're all interconnected in a very significant way.
Right. And with, picking up these kinds of issues within your art and your photography, do you think, there's this question, can art change the world? I sometimes ask myself that. And sometimes it seems like, oh, what can we do? And focus lies elsewhere, and, whatever. But what is this like for you? What do you think you can do with your art, with your photographs, with your books?
Well, the short answer, Alexa, is that art doesn't change anything, right? In a real sense, when you have issues that we're facing today, in terms of, for instance, you look at what's happening in Beirut, what happened in the explosion, and people right now, for instance, there don't have electricity. They have 1 hour of electricity. They don't have medicine. They have all these issues. Then so I'm always asking myself why this work is being done. But I think it has the ability to change people's perceptions about certain spaces, certain people, certain histories. It has the ability to bring invisible histories to the foreground, I think, in a way that will at least maybe shift people's perceptions about certain areas, certain ways of looking at the world. And that could maybe in the long run, if you have enough people kind of getting this shift in perception, then maybe you can get a larger kind of effect in the long run.
I think so too. And you answered this beautifully, because in reality and in this very moment, art doesn't change anything. But if it changes people's perception or inspires new thoughts or more understanding, that's incredibly much, at the same time, right?
Yeah, if you can foster some empathy towards certain issues or people or areas, for instance, or ideas, then I think in the long run, hopefully, perhaps it will make an impact.
Right. And also, I find it interesting. Before I talked to Samet Durgun, who photographs refugees in Berlin who are, transgender and queer and much more. And so this work may add to, hopefully to more tolerance and openness towards this specific group of people. Right. And in your case, you're also reflecting back on history and remind people that there was this, these things happening in the past, and that they're still alive, through you as a person and many others too. So there's this two-sided thing. So one looks in the future, and one can have effects like looking in the past, but also bringing it to the future, so that people work it out in their minds somehow.
Yes.
So that they don't forget, and that they're, on the other hand, that they might be more open towards people they think they're a stranger or not regular or whatever. Yeah. Yes,
and then hopefully it'll make them reflect on this and reflect then back on their own kind of history of where they're from. For instance, to look back first, if you're an American, you have these legacies of genocide in your own history, in your own backyard, right? So to make these visible, to connect to these other histories. Every country, every region has these kinds of histories that tend to become erased or tend to be backgrounded such that for whatever reason people don't want to address them. So connecting them is really important for me, not only in my own work, but as I'm also a curator. One of the things that we do as curation is we bring these different histories together and have them kind of speak to each other and make them visible to themselves.
Thank you. I think that was a very nice last word, so to say. Angela, what do you think?
Yes.
Yeah. 20 minutes is up already. Wow.
Yeah, time flies.
Yeah, it sure does.
Especially because you've just got up and you're full of energy because it's first thing in the morning for you.
It's the coffee, yeah.
Thank you so much. That was really interesting discussion. And I especially liked the direction we went in with can art change the world, and saying no, it can't. At first I thought that's such a terrible thing to say, but I think I would agree with you that it is that art has that power to change people's perceptions, and that's so important, and that's a big part of why we all do what we do, I think. So I'm going to open up to questions. Have we got anything there on the, we've not got any come in online. So if anybody is wanting to ask a question that's joining us online, then please do just drop that into the Q&A or the chat now. I'm going to ask the audience here if we've got any questions.
I have a question, actually.
Okay. Please come and
stand on my mark. Hi, thanks so much, both of you, Ara and Alexa. Ara, in the talk previously with Samit, he mentioned at one point something about gaze and whose gaze the work serves, and I wondered if you had any thoughts on that, practicing from a diasporic or minority community perspective. And then kind of a follow-up to that question is, who do you feel that your work empowers, and how do you get the work in front of that audience? And perhaps, Alexa, that's something you can talk about as well, being the publisher. Thanks.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the first part of the question? I didn't quite understand.
Yeah, sure. It's whose gaze do you think your work serves?
Yeah. Okay.
And do you feel any particular tension within that? And maybe you could just talk about that, you know, especially coming from a diasporic community perspective.
Yeah. Well, coming from a sort of diasporic perspective, usually we are marginalized, right? As a community, diasporic communities historically have been completely marginalized. And so typically there's nobody looking at whatever we do. And so there's two directions where I would like my work to go. One is out into the world to be looked at, and anybody who has similar kind of situations where they could get a connection to it, have a change of perspective or understanding. But also it goes, I think, internally. It's very, very important for the work to go back internal to the community where it came from. The community that has a similar history, where you try to find an articulation of the life of that community, of that history. I think that's really, really also very important. So there's a two-directional kind of effect that I'd like to create with my work. And what was the second part of the question?
Well, that kind of leads on to the second question, which is that you know, you spoke just then about having the work go back to its kind of home, or you know, how do you ensure that the work is seen by those people? And if that's the community that you wish to serve, or that the work serves, what is that process? How does that happen? And it not just be something that doesn't get seen by those people? Yeah,
so I mean, the simple answer is that you need to take it back to the community where it was photographed or where it was done. And so that's part of my intention, to go back to show this work in Beirut and have events and things and speak to that community. But there's always this tension, right? Because the kind of photography that I do may not connect to the community that you're working with, right? The community may not be very art connected, art related. And so I don't want to go back and speak only to an art community. I don't want to go back and speak only to people who are already sort of understand and connect with the work, but I want to be able to speak to a wider audience. And that's why I think like the author, the collaboration with the author, and that literary dimension of it, and the stories that the author tells, and the stories that the author tells that connect with my photographs, become a way in which a much wider audience can connect to the work.
Cool. Thank you. Thanks.
Yes.
I also wanted to mention that it's important too that the author or the photographer takes the book to where where you took the pictures, because for example, it's really hard to have an art book distribution in in Beirut, in Lebanon. How is that even existing? So we need to use other channels to get the work or its contents out there, like also social media and other stuff. It cannot just sit in a bookstore. It has to, we have to use all means we have basically to reach a wider audience. And sometimes it seems like wishful thinking, but at least we have to try. And also, the artist himself or herself is important, as an important factor in the equation. How to get it out and to also speak to a different group of people, rather than that already buys art books and photography books.
Right, and so that's why, for instance, part of my work is to do public art. Public art is in the public space where people will run into it, for instance, without going into a bookstore, without going into art gallery. And so that's why I've expanded my artistic practice into that kind of space. And even though it may be, for instance, the biggest project that I've done public art wise is I have one other project that's with Armenian Genocide survivors, where we blew up these portraits very, very large and placed them downtown in this very public space. And people were confronted with these images, and they really didn't know what these images were. And so there's this kind of confrontation that I think it's kind of important to have outside of the regular artistic spaces that we frequent.
Cool. Thank you very much, both. Cheers.
Thank you. Thank you for your question.
Thank you, Kehrer. And thank you. I think that was a really good example of a question that it's great to have the artist input in, but also the publisher as well, to find out about how the work is distributed once it becomes a publication. I think we're just about getting to time now, sadly. So unless we have any more questions here or on the chat, then I'm just going to ask my final question, which is, when is the book going to be published? I know it's in progress at the moment, so when can we see that on your website?
I think this question is supposed to go to me, but I don't know it, actually. Ara, you've been more in touch recently with the team and the timeline, so can you tell?
Yeah, so actually, I'm not completely sure either. All I know is that Paris Photo, I will be at Paris Photo doing a book signing, which is at beginning of November. And so I suspect the book has to be there at that time. And that's going to be the big release. And then I guess in December, it'll be available in the United States, I think. Hopefully, I mean, I have an exhibition here in LA in January to release the book. And so by that time, it'll be available. So by next month, it seems to be, should be available in Europe, especially.
Very soon, yes.
Yes.
Great.
Very good. Well, we look forward to seeing you in Paris then, perhaps. We will all be queuing up demanding the book at Paris Photo.
Okay.
So I just want to say a big thank you to Alexa and Ara for taking part in conversation this afternoon. Big thank you to the audience here in the gallery and as well at home watching this online. And finally, a big thank you to Karanjit, who is doing the technology and shaking his head at me now. It has been a fantastic day. It's been great to bring together people from all over the world to be part of our 7th annual Photobook Fair. So please do keep browsing our website. If you're here, take one last look at the stalls. And while you're there, of course, take a look at the virtual exhibition of In Which Language Do We Dream as well, which you can find online. So I think that's it from us. So thank you very much to our speakers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.
Bye.